I don't see any credible path to where government spending is going to slow down materially, which
Right.
means rates will have to trend up slightly to attract, which means there's really no realistic possibility of mortgage rates going down. You'll see them go down like a little bit here and there, but if you think you're going to see 3% again, I'll bet you a bottle of wine.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered podcast, where we are creating space and building community and trying to inform you as our listeners about what's going on in the commercial real estate world, the real estate world, and things that might affect you in your life. And I've got my first returning guest, Lon Welsh, is with us from Ironton Capital. Thank you for joining us again. And today we've got some guidelines, but we're just gonna kind of talk about some trends and what's been going on the last quarter or two in the market. So Lon, welcome to the show, and maybe do a quick little introduction about who you are, what you do, and then we'll jump right in.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. I run a private equity fund called Ironton Capital that I founded about 4 years ago, although I've been in commercial real estate for a couple decades. We have an income fund that pays about 12% quarterly, and we have a long-term growth fund that's in the 17 to 20% range. If current income is not important, you just need growth, we have that. But we have a lot of different solutions for our clients.
That's awesome. Well, you very much have experience in this space and have seen trends and seen things come and go. One thing that, as we were kind of preparing for this, you kind of share some slides with me about, consumer confidence right now. I mean, we were going through a crazy time. So maybe can you talk to us a little bit about where consumer confidence is at right now?
Yeah, so the University of Michigan does this great study of consumer confidence each month, and it was at a 40-year low about 2 months ago, and it has since come up by a little bit. So we think there's probably a number of things that are driving people to feel so pessimistic about the economy. The resurgence of inflation, the ongoing war, expensive gasoline prices. But interestingly enough, a lot of the decline in consumer confidence coincided with when AI engines became broadly available. And I think a lot of people have concern that they might lose their job due to AI. And
Yeah.
then if they can find a replacement job, it may not be as good as the job they have right now. So there's probably several structural forces at work that are leading to this decline in consumer sentiment.
Yeah, yeah. And what are you kind of seeing in like for trends with homes about for buyers? Is it a good time to buy? Is it a good time to sell? Are people feeling pretty pessimistic about that as well?
Yeah, there's a question in there about, do you think it's a good time to buy or sell a house? And is it a good time to sell is down, but not that severely? Is it a good time to buy is down quite a bit?
Yeah.
And we think that's probably a factor just of the consumer confidence that we talked about. Although interestingly, in a typical year in America, we'd have about 5 million resale homes transactions take place. And this year we're targeting just over 4 million. So the glass is more than 80% full, but the 19% that's missing sure generates a lot of negative headlines. The reality is, depending on which market you're in, a lot of places as a buyer, you've got much better conditions for negotiation now than you would have had, say, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And you can, get a good price. You can get some concessions for your mortgage. You could probably negotiate some things on the inspection where that may not have been possible in the past. So you should definitely be looking into it.
Yeah. And I think that, another thing that people that I've been hearing at least too is the state of the job market. How do you see that? What are some of the trends you're seeing there? I know you mentioned, AI and that sort of thing, but what are you hearing out there as far as, confidence in being able to get a job if a job is lost?
The unemployment rate is edging up at a super slow pace for several quarters now, but it's nothing, overly scary. When I was taking economics classes, forever and an age ago, we thought if we had 6% unemployment, that'd be fantastic. We've been around 4%, which is, would have been unthinkable, just a couple of decades ago under the economic theory then.
Yeah.
But I think it's the early innings of seeing AI's impact ripple through. There was a great article in the Wall Street Journal this morning about the job prospects for new MBAs. And there's just not as many employers looking for MBAs as there were in the past. And as a result of the less demand, wages are going down. So I think we're going to see that sort of impact ripple all the way through the economy, but it'll be relatively slowly. It's not going to happen like in a year. It's going to be like a 5-year process.
Yeah.
The analog I give to people is if you were in business in the 90s, that's when personal computers really became affordable and a lot of companies all over America would buy two or three PCs, and a couple of people in the office would finally learn how to use Excel. It was
Right.
a full decade before we had enough computer literacy that most people had a computer on their desktop and they knew how to type and they knew how to use Excel to make their job better. It was
Yeah.
a very slow, gradual transformation. Adoption of AI is going to be like that. It'll be just as profound, probably more profound,
Yeah.
but it was not going to be quick. It's going to take a little while.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, especially in the commercial real estate space, I know some companies are using it, some brokers are using it, but I think, we still don't understand the full capacity of what it can and can't do,
Yep.
so I think there's definitely that learning curve that I've noticed. Definitely have started to employ it a little bit in my business myself, but it seems so enormous. I would see how it would have to take that time for people to get more used to it, like you said, literate with it as well.
Yep. I think that there's going to be some use cases that'll be immediately obvious and people will start using it immediately. Like programming related things are like especially obvious and easy to implement.
Yeah.
But for the typical person who works in, say, accounting or finance or human resources or operations, like will it have a profound influence? Yes. Will it be quick? Like it's going to take time to figure out how to do it and do the trial and error and tune it and get it to work right and explain it to your colleagues. And it's a lot of steps.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a word that I've heard thrown around quite a bit in the last year or so, is the word recession. People
Yes.
are worrying about an upcoming recession. What are economists talking about right now? Like, and what are you seeing?
Well, so a recent poll of just citizens asked, do you think there'll be a recession in the next year? And just about three-quarters said yes. I think we're either in a recession now or we're about to be in one. The reality is that the economy is actually doing pretty well overall. And polls of economists, at least what I see in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, show the majority of economists believe that we're going to have modest economic growth over the next year or two. In fact, the Federal Reserve's formal forecast of the economy shows 1.1% growth over the next year. Nothing to write home about, but it's not a recession.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's so much, I think we live in an era where there's so much, clickbait and there's so much fear, and there's so much polarization that I think it's important to have these conversations and really dig into what are the facts. Like for me, for example, in the last 3 years were really rough, but then December came around and something happened and I'm like, I'm looking for new brokers to add to my team, you
Wow, that's
know.
great.
And so it's kind of it's not the one or the other. I think there's certain sectors that do well, and it's like on the commercial side, at least in my experience, I've seen a huge increase in activity,
Excellent.
whereas on the residential side, I'm part of Keller Williams now, and so just see, those who are in residential, how they're struggling. How do you see, like, kind of with, I'm thinking about like kids, my kids' age that are kind of just out of high school or getting up to close to getting out of high school, going to college. What does the future look like for home ownership for folks who are kind of, for young adults, I guess I would say, and young professionals?
If you take a look at the percentage of people in any given age cohort that own a house versus rent, and you can pick an age you want, 20, 30, 40, 50, we've seen really steady declines over the last couple of decades. I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but if you take a look at, say, 40-year-olds, 25 years ago, close to 85% of 40-year-olds owned a house, and now it's a lot, I'm sorry, 75%, and now it's 55%. So it's dropped by a fair amount.
Yeah.
So the relative desirability of renting right now is extremely high because we've overbuilt apartments in most metros. There's a knife fight among all these landlords to
Yeah.
get tenants. So at least in the Denver market, a lot of the newer buildings are offering 12 weeks of free rent to get you to come live in their
Yeah.
building. Well, it's really hard to get excited about stroking a check to buy a house when I can live in a luxury townhome downtown and get my first 3 months for free.
Yeah.
So the good news is that they have stopped the overproduction of these apartments. So the construction has fallen off a cliff. It'll take 2 or 3 years to burn through all of this excess inventory, and then those concessions will go away, rents will start to go up, it'll start to be painful to be a renter, and all this pent-up demand for people to be first-time buyers should return. So for those people who are listening who are in the real estate industry, it's a little bit tough right now, but there is an end in sight to it, so just hang in there.
Yeah. Well, it's always good to know that there's hope coming.
Yes.
Well, and what are some other factors that you're seeing with, kind of, people who are kind of new young professionals, obviously interest rates are higher than they have been, obviously not to the level that it was in the 80s. And I have to
Right.
remind clients sometimes that, hey, listen,
It's been worse.
it's been worse. What are some other factors that, is there increasing debt? What are some other factors that are creating that barrier for home ownership or even, purchasing commercial real estate?
For a lot of young adults, they graduate from undergrad or from grad school with quite a lot of debt. And then that, servicing those student loans makes it a little bit tougher to amass a down payment. But I think, the majority of people with their first house are using a very small down payment anyway. It seems though most major adult sort of decisions are getting postponed for just about everybody.
Yeah,
They're getting into serious relationships later. They're getting married a little later. They're buying their first house several years later. They're having their first kid several years later. And sort
yeah,
of just like pushed everything down the chain by a couple of years. The good news is when you survey people, do you believe that, the American dream is still to own your own home? Vast majority of people agree, say, yeah, that's a goal. When
yeah,
you interview renters, say, do you still have a plan to someday buy a house? More than half say yes, and sometime within the next 5 years.
yeah.
So I think it's still a dream and an aspiration for everybody. It's just like it's just been delayed by a little bit.
Yeah. And so, I want to talk about downturns and obviously, 20 end of 2022, early 23, that's when we really started seeing some of this slowing down. What were some other, key dates that we can look to in the past that can maybe kind of show us, where this is headed?
Well, this isn't the only downturn that we've gone through in the real estate market. So I think one easy one to look back at is 2009. So just as a quick recap for maybe the viewers that are newer to real estate, starting in the late 1990s, Congress issued some mandates to ease loan regulations. So they invented a category of loan products called stated income, stated asset, where you'd go to your loan officer, say, I make X dollars. And the loan officer would say, you qualify for this house. Like, do I need to bring my pay stubs or my W-2s or my tax form? Like, nope, we believe you. Just don't bring any paperwork. Like, here's a check. Go buy a house. So a lot of people who were not qualified bought a house, never made a payment. We had a huge surge of foreclosures in 2007, 8, and 9,
Yeah,
depending on which market you're in. So that led to like really a bust where not a lot of people were buying. And if you were in the industry in Denver, at least in 2009, it was a very grim time. And you might remember to get out of that, the government actually offered first-time buyers a huge incentive, like $10,000 just to go out and buy a house. Like, what a crazy idea.
yeah,
So, but once the gloom rose and we got past the crisis, the rebound was very strong. So I think there's a few structural things about consumer confidence, really cheap rents that are keeping a lot of people out of the market right now. But I think there's a limited time horizon for those to be negative headwinds for us.
yeah.
They will burn off mostly over the next 24 to 36 months. And when we do, I think we're going to see some very healthy years for real estate. So, these cycles, they don't repeat, but they do rhyme.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I think paying attention to what has happened, instead of getting stuck in the gloom, because I know, especially if you're a residential agent right now, and you're feeling this, just take this and keep doing what you're doing, keep serving your clients well, because when it comes back, you want to be ready for it.
Yeah,
What
if you're a
are,
residential realtor, the main thing to focus on is that normally we sell 5 million homes. We're only going to sell 4 million this year. That means the glass is 80%
right.
full. Don't focus on the 20% of the glass that's missing.
Yeah.
Focus on the 80% that's there. If the typical consumer actually really does know 7 particular realtors, and 5 of the 7 have checked out because they're ostriches with their head in the sand, and you're the only one reaching out consistently, you're going to take market share. This is
Yeah.
the time to build your business and take market share.
Yeah, that leads me to another question is like, what other opportunities do you see during, a time when things slow down? What's some advice or what are some things to be looked that people should be doing and people in real estate should be doing and other than just kind of, keep on keeping on, but what are some opportunities that could be had?
There's 3 parts to that question. So the first is double down on reaching out to your clients and your sphere of influence to be in contact. So more lunches, more cocktails, more coffee is just staying very much in touch with people because most of the rest of the realtors in their life are not doing it. So if they've got a neighbor thinking about selling a house, you want to be top of mind when
Yeah,
that dialogue comes up. The next is if you're in the experienced group of agents, experienced agents always do the best in a bad market. Why is that? If it's 2021 and the market is red hot, as a seller, you feel like anybody could sell my house. So my brother-in-law, who's never sold a house before, I'm just going to throw the bone to him and let him sell my house for me. When times are perceived to be difficult, as they are right now, they don't give the listing to their brother-in-law. They give the listing to the neighborhood expert.
yeah,
So if you are an experienced agent who has that credibility play to that strength and take market share away from everybody else.
Yeah.
Now, what if you're a newer agent? You can't make that claim. Then what you want to do is talk about your managing broker and how you and she are a team, and collectively you bring 40 years of experience to the market, and that gets rid of the objection.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. That's a great point. What are you seeing? Are there any markets right now that are seeming more affordable to buyers? I know a lot of the big cities, it's still tough. Denver's still tough. We have seen some prices adjust and landlords make some concessions and things like that. But, it seems like some of the places that where people are looking to buy, I mean, you've got to make six figures to be able to afford a mortgage.
Yeah, if you're in a large coastal market, or Denver is the most expensive non-coastal market, you do actually probably have to have a household income of just about at six figures or slightly above to afford, an entry-level house in San Francisco, Denver, New York, Washington. But there's plenty of inland markets where that's not the case. And for people who are like in smaller cities, like maybe like Des Moines or Savannah, Georgia, there's a ton of amazing opportunities that are still affordable to anybody with a mainstream sort of a job. So, maybe you're not going to be moving to Los Angeles, but there's plenty of other great places to live as well.
Right. And I think we're starting to see that trend happening as well in commercial, where what even just in leasing is there is a bit of a shift of people moving away from the larger cities into secondaries. So I think we're definitely seeing secondary markets kind of being kind of where most of the activity is happening right now.
I think the work from home trend has enabled people to not have to be tethered to a large city with easy proximity to downtown like they had in the past. So that's going to enable what you just said. And that's probably just going to be an enduring trend. I don't see that changing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I know that, there's more to a more, to purchasing than just a mortgage, right? I know we've seen on the commercial side, every other year, at least in Colorado, taxes and insurance, being a huge factor. And I think sometimes people don't consider that. How are you seeing, escrow items like that, where it's kind of added into your mortgage or whatever? How are you seeing that affecting activity and people's behaviors?
Well, it's a huge headwind for commercial as well as residential that in most markets, I don't remember the exact stat off the top of my head, but I believe it's something on the order of a 25 to 35% increase in property taxes from pre-COVID to today. Insurance is up by close to 50%, and hiring contractors for labor plus the materials associated with a lot of common renovation jobs is up almost 80%
Yeah.
pre-COVID to today. So, the interest rates aren't that dissimilar to what they were pre-COVID, but the prices for the homes are higher. And then all the ancillary that go with it, as you just mentioned, have gone up a lot. So
Yeah.
that it just creates a lot of barriers for people to get the acquisition done.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how things are maybe a little bit different now than they were, the average back in 2008, 2009, where the average property was underwater.
Yep.
Can we maybe talk a little bit about that and how it's different now than it is then?
Yeah, I often get asked, are we going to see a repeat of the foreclosure boom that tanked the real estate market and led to a big recession in 2007, 8, and 9? And the answer is it's highly unlikely. And the reason for that is, on average, in America in 2008, the mortgages summed up to a larger number than the value of all the residential properties. America in composite was underwater. So there were lots of underwater homes. So it was no surprise that we had this foreclosure phenomenon. Today couldn't be any more different. 40% of properties are completely paid off with no mortgage
Wow.
whatsoever. So that 40% is certainly not going to go into foreclosure. And of the homes that actually do have a mortgage, half of those have less than 50% loan to value.
Ooh.
So the amount of equity in Americans' homes right now is in the tens of trillions of dollars. So the number of people who are underwater on their mortgage is very small. I don't have the chart for me. It's less than 2%. Now,
Wow.
it's not equal in every neighborhood. So, like if you're in Cleveland or Chicago, it's going to be very close to zero. There's a couple markets in Florida and Texas where it's like in the 8 to 10% range.
Ooh.
So, will there be some markets, like Austin, where there's going to be some foreclosure uptick? Absolutely. But it'll be concentrated in some certain neighborhoods that tend to probably skew lower income and lower housing price. It'll probably be contained just to those regions. Broadly speaking, we don't have a foreclosure problem looming.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. What do you see happening with mortgage rates? I mean, again, that's what we get stuck on the topic, but what do you anticipate?
So So the way the mortgage rates work in the US for a 30-year fixed rate is it's priced off of the 10-year treasury plus a risk premium. So the 10-year treasury right now is floating 4.4, 4.5%. The risk premium is about 2%. So the mortgage is about 6.5, plus or minus a little bit. So the challenge is that America is running a deficit for government spending, and most other industrialized countries are as well. So collectively, there's a gigantic demand for a lot of new debt every year for all these large countries to finance their big deficits. The problem is there's only a finite amount of global investor demand to buy all this government debt. So the only way to attract more people in to invest to buy that debt is to increase the interest rate. And that's what we've seen happen.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, unless we see, most industrialized countries control their spending and stop spending so much, or maybe like actually cut spending, like what a novel thought, I don't see any credible path to where government spending is going to slow down materially, which means rates will have to trend up slightly to attract, which means there's really no realistic possibility of mortgage rates going down. You'll see them go down like a little bit here and there, but if you think you're going to see 3% again, I'll bet you a bottle of wine. There's no chance of that happening. I don't think you'll see the fours. I don't think you'll see fives. I mean, could you see 6.0? Yeah, but that's probably the floor. The good news is that on average, over the last 50 years, rates have been higher than they are today most of the time.
Yeah.
So we sold millions of homes those years in the 80s when mortgage rates were like 15%. If we can sell houses when it's 15%, we can for sure sell them at 6.5.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, how have you seen the geopolitical stage play into the trends that we're seeing now? I mean, obviously, where, there's a war happening, there's different things, what are some key factors that, as we look at the world as a whole, how that kind of bleeds into our everyday life when it comes
Well, it really impacts us in two levels, I think, at a consumer and a professional investor level. So for the investors, if there's unrest, then it increases the risk of a global recession. It certainly increases the price of oil, which causes a whole cascade of slowing effects throughout the economy. And it increases perceived risk. So investors want to make more for investing in anything. So it spikes the interest rates when there's a crisis. And of course, that flows through to mortgages almost instantaneously.
Yeah.
And then from the consumer standpoint, consumer sentiment is a large predictor of activity. If people don't feel good about the economy or the security of their job, they're sure not going to go buy a house.
Yeah.
So when they're reading these negative headlines about war, that's part why the consumer sentiment is low. Once that's resolved, sentiment will probably go up and there'll be more willingness to buy a house. So it hits us from both angles, unfortunately.
Yeah. How are you seeing this affecting like commercial real estate investors or even, investors who own houses? What are you seeing right now? What are you hearing from people?
I think for the obvious deals that just make a lot of sense, if the mortgage rate for a commercial building goes up by a quarter point, it's not going to impact the economics of the deal. The bank is still going to approve it, and that buyer is still going to want to get it done. So for the solid deals, it's really no problem at all. Where you see the friction from this sort of stress in the market is the marginal deal that just barely pencils. And then when there's a crisis with oil prices and now the rate goes up by a quarter point, the deal just barely tips to where it doesn't pencil. Those marginal deals are the ones that get squashed.
Yeah.
Not dissimilar to like, if you've got like a third trade up couple in their 50s who's putting $1 million down on a $2 million house, do they care what the mortgage rate is?
Right.
No.
Right.
But
No.
if you've got a first-time buyer who's just barely able to qualify, it doesn't take anything really to knock that buyer off the table as an eligible party.
Yeah. Well, as we start going into quarter three, what are some maybe thoughts or predictions that you have that we need to be aware of?
So we talked about mortgage rates being flat or slightly going up. I do think that this war will be behind us soon, and that consumer confidence will start to pick up, and I think that will boost our sales. We'll sell more homes next year than this year or the year prior. I do think that across most U.S. markets, we're going to burn through this glut of inventory of rental properties, which will push people to want to be a buyer in 2 to 3 years. So that's all positive information. I think in most markets, the homes are in a stronger position as a seller to negotiate than the condos. And I don't think that's going to change anytime over the next year or probably 18 months. I do think that you're going to see more people exit real estate than enter. And I think for the people who work hard, I think they're going to take market share. This is actually a good market if you're willing to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're listening out there, take what Lon shared with us today. I mean, share this with a friend, help educate other people to know and listen to experts like Lon who know what they're talking about. And I'm so thankful, Lon, that you've been here and we've been able to talk a little bit about what's been going the last couple of quarters. How can people find you? Where do they connect with you?
Then go to irontoncapital.com. So Ironton capital.com. Or just call me 303-619-0633. Just send me a text and I'll set up a time to talk. I'm not that busy. I can always make 10 or 15 minutes to talk to somebody about their investing strategy. I had a lot of people with a lot of experience help me when I was new.
Yeah.
And those little conversations I had really helped me out a lot. And I'm very happy to give back. So don't feel bashful about that.
That's awesome. That's something we offer on the commercial real estate brokerage side as well. So know you guys that I know that investment and mortgage rates and all these different things seem like it's intimidating, but all you need is the right people around you. So Lon, thanks again for being a guest with us, and we look forward to another conversation soon.
I look forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.
If today's episode gave you valuable commercial real estate insights, subscribe, rate, and share it. Connect with me and the David Commercial Real Estate team through the show notes. Remember, real estate is more than buildings. It's about building community. See you next time.